There was a time when climbing a hill with 150 horsepower was a triumph, and braking meant praying your brakes would hold. But that era was only the beginning. Today I'll tell you how we went from engines that sweated to hold 10 tons, to beasts roaring with 1,000 horsepower. This is the raw, wild story of the horsepower war, and it's far from over. The limited power of early engines. Back then, if you were a truck driver, your engine options were being generous, uninspiring. To put things in perspective, today, a long-haul truck can easily top 500 or 600 horsepower. Some even pass 750, but in the 1940s, if your engine made between 150 and 200 horsepower, you were already lucky. That's about the power of a modern Toyota Camry, except instead of moving a 500-kilogram car, it had to pull an empty truck weighing over 9,000 kilograms, and that's before adding a single box of cargo. So yes, speed was definitely not its strong suit. Driving a truck was a test of pure endurance. Now let's talk about what it was really like to handle one of those monsters. They weren't just slow, they were exhausting. Hills, for example, were every driver's worst enemy. Faced with a steep climb, you could expect the truck to drop to single-digit speeds, often as slow as 8 kilometers per hour, and that was if you were lucky and the engine didn't stall completely. There are stories of truckers carrying bricks, wooden blocks, or even big stones in the cab. Why? Because when the truck lost power on an uphill stretch, the procedure went like this. 1. Jump out while it rolled backward. 2. Wedge a block under the wheel to stop it from sliding down the hill. 3. Climb back in, restart, and try again. It was as much a cardio workout as it was a test of courage. And braking, let's not even start. The urgent need for more power. Even with all the danger and physical strain, road freight kept growing because someone had to deliver the goods. But there was one big problem. The engines simply weren't up to the job. And so the race for more power was born. The 1950s, the horsepower obsession begins. By the 1950s, highway freight was booming. The United States was expanding fast. Interstate highways were being built, suburbs were spreading, and demand for freight transport was exploding. But there was a big catch: trucks were still weak. Sure, engines were a bit better than in the 1940s, but hauling a load uphill still felt like dragging a piano through mud. Drivers were begging for more power, more torque, and greater reliability. Highway speeds were climbing, but trucks could barely keep pace. Loads were heavier, demanding more from the engines, and railroads were fierce competition. If trucking was to be the future of freight, stronger engines were non-negotiable. The arrival of turbochargers. Then they came, blessed turbochargers. By the late 1950s, heavy-duty engines began to be fitted with turbos. Suddenly, trucks could climb grades without praying to the diesel gods. Engines didn't just get more powerful, they also became more efficient. It was a turning point for the industry. During that era, models like the Kenworth 500 series, Peterbilt 281, and Mach B model became popular. The 1950s marked the start of a true horsepower arms race. Manufacturers saw the potential. More power meant better times, higher efficiency, new technology, but the real explosion of brute force was still ahead. The 1970s, horsepower takes off. By the 1970s, trucking hadn't just taken off, it was in full acceleration. Freight demand was at record highs. The U.S. economy was booming, and truckers worked marathon shifts to keep the country moving. But everyone wanted one thing: more power. Companies like Cummins, Caterpillar, and Detroit Diesel were locked in an all-out horsepower war. No one wanted to be that driver, the one crawling up a mountain at 20 kilometers per h. Downshifting every few seconds, while a buddy with a better engine roared past with a smug grin. Truck stops were filled with stories of drivers climbing long grades without ever touching third gear. These tales were part bragging rights, part motivation, because more power meant less time on the road, faster deliveries, and most importantly, more money. And manufacturers knew it. Engines like the Cummins NTC 350 began to appear. Pushing, yes, 350 horsepower, monstrous numbers for the era, but this was only the beginning. Turbochargers become the norm. What started in the 1950s with a handful of turbocharged engines had by the 1970s become standard. The turbo became an essential part of heavy-duty diesels, boosting both power and efficiency. Now, trucks could hold speed on steep grades, cover long distances at higher averages, and haul heavier loads without drinking fuel like a steam locomotive. More power didn't just transform performance. It changed trucker culture itself. By then, driving a truck wasn't just a job, it was a matter of pride. Oil crisis and forced evolution. Just as power was multiplying, another challenge hit. The 1973 oil crisis. Fuel prices skyrocketed. Some states rationed supply, limiting truckers' mileage. But here's the twist. Instead of stopping the horsepower race, the crisis forced engines to evolve. Why? Because builders had to create engines that were both powerful and efficient. They refined turbo use to squeeze more output from less fuel. Aerodynamics began to matter. Trucks were shaped with sleeker lines to cut drag. Torque climbed, allowing heavy loads to be hauled without relying purely on brute force. By the end of the decade, truck engines were regularly surpassing 400 horsepower, unthinkable just 30 years earlier. And the best or worst, depending on your view, was that the horsepower war wasn't over. It was about to get even crazier in the 1980s and 1990s. The 1990s, the birth of legends. Fast forward to the 1990s, a decade when something incredible was happening. Truck engines were breaking the 500 horsepower barrier, and it wasn't an accident or a passing trend. By then, the transport industry demanded bigger, more efficient, tougher engines. The boom in trade, the expansion of long-haul routes, and the need to cover huge distances without stopping forced manufacturers to step up, literally. Unlike previous decades when trucks barely managed heavy loads, in the 90s power was no longer a luxury, it was an expectation. Engines that made history. It was a golden era for heavy-duty diesel development. Some models became true icons of trucking culture, machines drivers took pride in, not just tools of the trade. One of the most celebrated was the Detroit Diesel Series 60. Among the first heavy-duty engines fully controlled by electronics. A straight six capable of more than 500 horsepower and over 1,800 lb of torque in its most powerful versions, it quickly became the favorite of both large fleets and independent operators. Another giant was the Caterpillar 3406E, a true workhorse built to last over 1 million miles with proper care. Its pulling power was legendary, especially for haulers crossing mountain routes. Many drivers swore the only thing that could kill it was pure neglect. These engines offered more than brute strength. Most importantly, they delivered trust. Truckers stopped worrying about failures at 300,000 kilometers and started expecting their engines to run strong for a decade or more. The electronic revolution. One of the biggest technological leaps of the era was the introduction of electronic fuel injection systems and engine control units, ECUs. Before that, diesels were almost entirely mechanical, which limited both performance and efficiency. Electronics changed everything. Suddenly, a 500 horsepower engine was no longer rare. It became the new standard. And the most exciting part? We still hadn't hit the ceiling. A new millennium of road monsters entered the 2000s, and trucks turned into true beasts. Gone were the wheezing 1940s engines that crawled up hills. Modern tractor-trailers became rolling fortresses with power plants that could humble some supercars. Today we're talking well over 600 horsepower and more than 2,500 lb of torque engines capable of running 1 million miles without replacement. Because let's be honest, no driver wants to swap an engine every 300. 000 km. Today's Titans consider a few real-world examples. Kenworth W990 with a Cummins X15 engine cranks out up to 605 GP and 2,500 lb of torque, hauling virtually anything without breaking a sweat. Peterbilt 389 with a PACCAR MX-13 blends efficiency and cutting-edge tech, delivering as much as 565 GP. Freightliner Cascadia, powered by the Detroit DD16, is built for endless long-haul work, offering 600 GP and brutal torque for mile-after-mile endurance. But the impressive part isn't just raw muscle. These engines are smarter, cleaner, and more precise thanks to electronic injection, advanced turbos, and aerodynamic design. They pull like monsters while sipping fuel and cutting emissions. A revealing comparison. Put it in perspective. In the 1940s, a driver with 150 GP was lucky. By the 70s, 350 GP made you king of the mountain. In the 90s, 500 GP was the gold standard. Today, 600 GP is just another Tuesday. Modern truckers don't fight hills, they conquer them. They don't burn fuel like locomotives, they use it with surgical precision. And this race isn't over because a new player has entered the field. Electric power. The future is here. Electric trucks. A new generation is rewriting the rules. Electric motors aren't just competing with diesels, they're leaving them behind. Take the Tesla Semi. It promises over 1000 GP and instant torque. No gear shifts, no lag, pure power from the first second. Picture a fully loaded rig accelerating from 0 to 60 miles per hour faster than a sports car. That's where we're headed. Unlimited power, zero emissions, and near total silence. A roar or a whisper? Here's the big question. Will truckers embrace this silent era of instant thrust with no rumble or vibration? Or will they keep craving the deep growl of a classic V8 diesel? For now, diesel still rules the highways, but the future is uncertain. In just a few years, we may see electric rigs with 2000 GP hauling freight across continents without emitting a single gram of CO2. What we do know is that the horsepower war isn't over. Every generation wants more. Why do engines keep getting stronger? Because every new wave of drivers demands it. More speed, more strength, more efficiency, and as long as there are mountains to climb and loads to haul, trucks will keep evolving, from the first wheezing engines to today's quiet giants that glide for thousands of miles without breaking a sweat. This is far from the end. It's only the beginning. If this beastly evolution of engines hooked you, buckle up, because the best is yet to roar. Hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for the next story packed with horsepower, wild torque, and endless highway. See you on the next stretch where power never sleeps.